Welcome to Women Who Kick Glass, the podcast that dives into the fearless women who changed history and the fights that are still shaping our world today. From suffragists to civil rights activists, these women refuse to back down, breaking barriers and demanding change. And now, here's your host, an advocate, a storyteller, and a woman who kicks glass herself, Ann Potenza.
Emmeline Pankhurst was a British political activist and a leader of the suffragette movement who dedicated her life to achieving women's suffrage in the United Kingdom. She was a prominent figure in her fight for women's rights and was known for her militant tactics and unwavering determination. She's also credited with inspiring a whole new breed of suffragists in the United States, including Alice Paul. Emmeline was a controversial firebrand and the very embodiment of the famous quote, "Well-behaved women rarely make history." She was born Emmeline Goulden in Manchester, England in 1858, and both her parents were supporters of women's suffrage and they were both abolitionists. So she was raised in a political family. Although they supported women's suffrage and the general advancement of women in society, her parents still didn't believe that their daughters would advance to the same levels that males would accomplish. So it was pretty disappointing for her to hear her dad come into her room one night when he thought she was asleep, and she heard him say to himself, "What a pity she wasn't born a lad." And that's because she was the oldest of his 5 daughters, and she was very smart. She started reading at the age of 3, and when she was 9 years old, she read the Odyssey. And the other trilogy that she read that she claims inspired her most of her life was the history of the French Revolution. So yes, her parents believed that their daughters needed to learn the art of making the home beautiful so that they could secure a husband at an early age. And unfortunately, Emmeline did not have the same opportunities in education that her brothers did. But she grew up with her parents being politically active, so she was exposed to that world at an early age. Her father ran a small business. He also bought a theater and acted in Shakespeare plays. So more than likely, you could attribute that Emmeline absorbed the drama and theatrics from her father when she started her political activism. As part of the movement to end U.S. slavery, her father welcomed American abolitionist Henry Ward Beecher to their home, and Henry's sister, Harriet Beecher Stowe, wrote the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was one of the favorite books that Emmeline's mom would read to the children before they went to bed at night. So being around the abolitionist movement was very common to Emmeline as a child. She even remembers at an early age being at bazaars where they would raise money to help free the slaves in the United States. She was 14 years old when she attended her first suffrage meeting. When Emmeline was coming home from school one day, she saw her mom going out to one of the suffrage meetings, and she asked where she was going. And when her mom told her that the guest speaker was going to be the editor of the Women's Suffrage Journal, who was named Lydia Becker, Emmeline immediately wanted to accompany her mother to this meeting, and she did. And after that first meeting of hearing Lydia speak about the women's movement, she was hooked. She said that when she left that meeting, she was a confirmed and conscious suffragist. Emmeline met her husband, Richard Pankhurst, when she was 20 years old, and he was a lawyer who was also involved in women's suffrage. So they had a lot in common. He advocated for women's suffrage, freedom of speech, and educational reform. Emmeline and Richard had 5 children together, and even with the full family, she still found time for her women's suffrage party, and she would regularly attend her meetings and carry on with her activism. When they moved their family to London, they opened up their home to many political activists and intellectual discussions that were going on in those days. They said they invited socialists, protesters, anarchists, suffragists, free thinkers, radicals, and humanitarians of all schools. One of the groups that Emmeline was active in was the Parliament Street Society. And this group started to advocate more for voting rights for unmarried and widowed women, thinking that Married women were okay because their husbands could cast votes for them. The Pankhursts believed that all women should get the right to vote, whether they were married or unmarried. So they decided to start a new organization called the Women's Franchise League, which was the WFL. So that was started in 1889, but then it started being thought of as a radical organization because not only did they want women's right to vote, but they also thought that women should have rights when it came to divorce and inheritance. Emmeline was part of many activist organizations, but it was soon after her husband passed away that she started a new organization called the Women's Suffrage and Political Union. It was 1903 at this time, and there had already been 3 suffrage bills that had been submitted to Parliament, and they just kept getting ignored and passed over. And Emmeline was getting really fed up that the women's rights were just being overlooked, and nobody was really considering it an urgent matter in the government. So this is when she started taking on more aggressive tactics with trying to get the attention of the government to listen to how important this was to the women. The Women's Suffrage and Political Union motto was deeds, not words. And this is when the militant action started. At first, the Women's Suffrage Political Union was like all the other organizations. They wrote letters, they organized rallies, they gathered petitions for signature. They even started a newsletter called Votes for Women. But then when they kept finding themselves being ignored, nothing seemed to be making a difference. The protests started getting louder. They started protesting outside of Parliament, very, very loud protests. They started fighting back against the policemen that were trying to keep them from getting out of hand. They would start to heckle politicians. They started smashing windows. They started arson, setting things on fire. And when they did get arrested, they would go on hunger strikes inside the prison. And this is when they really started getting the attention of the people and the politicians, because when they were in prison, they would not eat, and they had to be force-fed by the prison guards, which was such a brutal practice that the public became very outraged, and they started getting on the side of the women that were imprisoned. And of course, there were people who opposed this, but it did exactly what Emmeline and her union members wanted. It got attention, and it started moving the needle in favor of women's suffrage. It was in 1908 when Emmeline and the Women's Social and Political Union, I think I called it Women's Suffrage and Political Union before. Okay, it's the Women's Social and Political Union. On this day in 1908, it was a Sunday, and it was called Women's Sunday, and they had over 500,000 people in the community attend this march. They gathered 30,000 women to march to Hyde Park through 7 different processions holding 700 different banners, including one that said, "Not chivalry, but justice." This march was the first time the Women's Social and Political Union wore their colors out in public, which were purple, white, and green. And for weeks leading up to it, stores in the neighborhoods would feature white dresses and accessories in purple and green that the women could wear. And on the day of the march, all the women wore dresses of white and were accessorized in purple and green, and even men wore ties and accessories to match the women. It was said that just 2 days before the event, over 10,000 scarves were sold in the colors of green, white, and purple. And it was covered in the newspapers. The Daily Chronicle stated, "Never has so vast a throng gathered in London to witness a parade of political forces." And the Standard said, "From first to last, it was a great meeting, daringly conceived, splendidly stage managed, and successfully carried out. Hyde Park has probably never seen a greater crowd of people." So it was planned that after the rally, 12 of the women's suffragists were going to gather in Parliament Square and give their speeches on women's suffrage. But when they went there, they were seized by the policemen. They weren't allowed to give their speeches. And a couple of the members of the Women's Social Political Union got upset, and they threw rocks through the windows, just because they were so frustrated and they were angry and they were acting out. And those two women got arrested. They were thrown in jail. So when the two women were brought up in front of the judge, Emmeline was there to remind them that throughout British history, there had been many male political agitators before them that had done the same thing when they were trying to get civil rights. So there was definitely a double standard. The women who were using these militant actions were getting prosecuted, and the women still kept getting thrown to jail, and they were going on hunger strikes. When it was all added up, Emmeline had been arrested at least 7 times before women's suffrage was finally approved. In fact, when she was 50 years old and she was standing before the court, she gave her famous speech from the dock. And this is what she said regarding what was going on at that time. I belong to organizations to secure for women that political power which I have felt was essential to bringing about those reforms which women need. I have tried constitutional methods. I have been womanly. When you spoke to some of my colleagues the day before yesterday about their being unwomanly, I felt that bitterness which I know every one of them felt in their hearts. We have tried to be womanly. We have tried to use feminine influence, and we have seen that it is of no use. Men who have been impatient and have invariably got reforms for their impatience, and they have not our excuse for being impatient. She goes on to say, we are here today because we are driven here. We have taken this action because as women, and I want you to understand it is as women we have taken this action. It is because we realize that the condition of our sex is so deplorable that it is our duty even to break the law in order to call attention to the reasons why we do so. She goes on to say, now we have tried every way. We have presented larger petitions than were ever presented for any other reform. We have succeeded in holding greater public meetings than men have ever had for any reform, in spite of the difficulty which women have in throwing off their national diffidence, that desire to escape publicity which we have inherited from generations of our foremothers. We have broken through that. We have faced hostile mobs at street corners because we were told that we cannot have that representation for our taxes which men have won unless we converted the whole of the country to our side. Because we have done this, we have been misrepresented. We have been ridiculed. We have had contempt poured upon us. The ignorant mob at the street corner has been incited to offer us violence, which we have faced unarmed and unprotected by the safeguards which cabinet ministers have. We know that we need the protection of the vote even more than men have needed it. And finally, this is the only way we can get that power which every citizen should have of deciding how the taxes she contributes to should be spent and how the laws she has to obey should be made. And until we get that power, we shall be here. We are here today and we shall come here over and over again. You must realize how futile it is to settle this question by binding us over to keep the peace. You have tried it. It has failed. Others have tried to do it and have failed. If you had power to send us to prison, not for 6 months, but for 6 years, for 16 years, over the whole of our lives, the government must not think that they can stop this agitation. It will go on. We are going to win. Our women have taken that advice. If we are in prison, they will continue to take that advice. Well, sir, that is all I have to say to you. We are here not because we are lawbreakers. We are here in our efforts to become lawmakers. Powerful words from a powerful woman, a gutsy woman, a fearless woman, a woman who put her life on the line so that we could have the right to vote. And she succeeded, but it wasn't right away. When World War I started in 1914, Emmeline and the women suffragists did put their political activism to the side because they thought it was very important to be united behind their country. And they stepped in and helped take over roles in the workforce that men had been doing and were now at war, so they couldn't be doing. So they did their part. And it was through their efforts during World War I that people really started noticing that the women had stepped up and their actions had value in their community. And the public started to take notice, and the contributions that those women did is what eventually also helped lead to the women's suffrage being passed in 1918, which was 2 years before America got suffrage passed. So in 1918, when the law was passed, it was called the Representation of the People Act. And what it did was it allowed women who were over 30 years old who owned property to be able to participate in the voting process. So technically, even though it was women's suffrage, it wasn't complete women's suffrage. It wasn't until 1928 when the Equal Franchise Act went into effect. And that was when finally women over the age of 21 in United Kingdom were allowed to vote. Unfortunately, Emmeline Pankhurst died just a few weeks before seeing her dream come true. But it was her tireless efforts that laid the foundation for future generations of women to be able to vote. And her legacy continues to inspire. For instance, Emmeline is an inspiration for modern activism. Her radical tactics and unwavering dedication to women's rights serves as a model for contemporary activists fighting for social change. Her legacy encourages individuals to challenge the status quo and advocate for change even when faced with opposition. And there's the ongoing fight for equality. While women have made significant changes and progress in various areas, gender inequality persists, particularly in areas like pay equity, political representation, and access to health care. Emmeline's work highlights the need for continued advocacy to address these issues and ensure equal opportunities for all. And then there's the importance of women's voices in politics. Emmeline's fight for the right to vote was a pivotal step in ensuring that women participate in political decision-making. Today, her legacy underscores the importance of women having a voice in shaping policies that affect our lives, and she is a symbol of resilience and persistence. Emmeline's life, which includes her imprisonment and her hunger strikes, demonstrates the resilience and perseverance required to achieve social change. Her story serves as an inspiration for those who face adversity in striving for a more just world. And finally, there's the continued relevance of women's rights. The recent Supreme Court decision on reproductive rights has highlighted the need for ongoing protection of women's bodily autonomy and access to health care. Emmeline's activism reminds us that these rights are fundamental and must be defended. Thank you for learning a little bit about Emmeline Pankhurst with me. If her story inspires you, please share this episode, start a discussion, and make sure that you join us next week when we cover another suffragist who was also inspired by Emmeline Pankhurst. We will be talking about suffragist Alice Paul. I'm Ann Potenza, and until next week, keep kicking glass.
Thanks for listening to Women Who Kick Glass. Be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more, contact the show. Visit womenwhokickglass.com. Until next time, keep kicking glass.